So then the next question that's raised is, when is it helpful to send a child to experts outside the school, such as psychologists, educational psychologists, whoever? And the truth is that outsourcing to experts should happen. It should happen when the school can't actually solve an issue to help a child. Now, by doing this course, you should be able to help about 90% of these children who have dyslexia or visual stress within the school and without any help from the outside. But that still leaves the other 10%. So when should you send the child to experts and psychologists? Well, the times when it's most important to send children outside the school to experts is when there are other issues that are influencing the child who has dyslexia. Other issues such as trauma issues, Asperger's, serious behavioural issues, etc. Another time then it's good to send children outside the school is when the school has tried for an extended period of time on strategies that really should have worked. And should have helped the child, but things just don't appear to be working. And that's when it's time to go, you know what? We tried what we knew, and now let's get a bit of extra help. Now, when should you not outsource the child? Well, it's when those criteria aren't there, okay? Apart from when there's serious issues, such as trauma or whatever, and apart from when you've tried things that just haven't worked for some unexplainable reason, apart from those times, then you want to try and work with the child within the school. Now, the benefits of sending children to experts outside of the school, what are they? Well, firstly, the school does not get held accountable or have to take responsibility for children who are not learning. Okay, now, to a school leader, that may be a benefit, but to you as a teacher or a parent, that's not really a benefit. That's just sort of a side issue. Another benefit of sending children to experts outside the school is that sometimes the school can get extra funding. Now, if you're using that funding to do activities with that child that are just perfect for what they need, great. Okay, that's a really good reason to send a child to an expert outside the school. Another reason is that if you send a child to a very competent, a very capable psychologist or expert, then that specialized knowledge can be very, very helpful, you know. But at the same time, I have to say that in my city, I once chatted with one of the most respected psychologists in my city, and I said to him, who is a great educational psychologist in this town, in this city? And you know what? He was scratching his head and he came back to me and said, you know what? I can't think of one who's great. Try this one. So I guess what I'm saying is if you've got the right person, you're in a good spot. But don't just assume that just because someone's a psychologist that they're the right person. Make sure that they are actually dealing with things that are within their skill base and things that are within their sphere of capability. Now, what are the downsides or the problems of sending children and parents outside the school? Now, it's really important for you to know this because this is not something you just want to skip over in the course. You want to be able to justify to your school leadership why you're taking the approach you're taking, okay? If they don't go along with what you're saying, that's okay. You've done your job, you've put forward your opinion, and you can have a clean conscience about that. But you want to know the why of why you want to try and work with kids within the school. So the first reason is, as soon as you step outside the school, send a child off to one of the experts or an educational psychologist, whoever, you're going to look at about $1,000 to $1,500 out of the family's budget. And for some families, that might be bearable, but for most families, that's an expense they didn't need, and it's a sizable chunk from their budget. Another reason to not be dealing with having to send them outside, but actually to deal with kids inside the school, is that it takes weeks to organise the paperwork. You know, there's paperwork for the parents, there's paperwork for the school. There's a lot of paperwork, and paperwork is not results. Paperwork is paperwork. Another reason is that children stay on waiting lists with experts and psychologists for up to 6 months. In fact, in my city, 6 months is quite common. And while the children are on a waiting list, the schools often do nothing in the meantime. Well, why would they do something, they think? Because it's in the hands of the experts, right? Well, if a child's sitting on a waiting list for 6 months, you know, how much of a child's life is wasted in that 6 months? As well as that, often kids who are doing the expert assessments, while they're doing that, they feel really stupid because those tests, they're tested in so many different ways and they're tested against many different criteria and with so many different tests that really those tests are designed to find problems. And to do that, the child is going to experience failure and in a big way. So imagine going and spending a whole day feeling disillusioned because you can't achieve anything on a whole series of tests. Well, you know, do you really want to put a child through that? You know, maybe if there's going to be a result, but if there's no great benefit to it, you want to try and avoid that. Also, keep in mind that the testing process is often more about justifying a psychologist's conclusion than actually diagnosing what the problem is and what the solution is. So, the testing process will create, say, a 10-page report, and most of that report is just analysing data, and it's basically reporting back data of test scores and things like that. Usually the recommendations are tucked away at the back of the report, and I often read reports that have just really been copied and pasted with a few numbers changed, and that really are not very personalised. I mean, they're a very standardised format because that suits the psychologist, but in terms of actually giving good information, good valuable feedback of what the next steps are to help the child get out of the challenging spot they're in, they're not actually that useful. So we're talking about a very involved big process for such a poor outcome, such an ineffective result. Now, another reason why it can be tough, it can be not ideal to send children outside the school, is that the school is then not involved in the testing for the child, and the school, I guess they're just not invested in the process. They've outsourced it, they've washed their hands of it, they're waiting until that day that the report eventually comes back. But because the school is not actively involved in the process, they don't tend to take the report as, or the recommendations in the report, if there are any, they don't tend to take those recommendations too seriously because they weren't involved in the process. They've got no relationship with the people who were doing it, and they're not invested in it. So if you can deal with things inside the school, then the teachers are involved. They're invested in the process. They know that child's name, and they're determined to help that child get some results. Also, parents want to know what the diagnosis is for their child. But as well as that, they want to know what steps to take and what the next things are to do to get things back on track. See, whereas the experts are usually pretty focused on diagnosing and justifying their diagnosis, which is fair enough, it's good, it's what they're paid to do. The parents aren't actually that interested in the diagnosis or the reason why that diagnosis is happening. The parents actually just want to know, what are the solutions? What are the next steps? What do we do from here to have things get back on track? And that's the stuff that the psychologists or experts are not usually as focused on, and they're not usually as good at coming up with those steps as a pretty good teacher. So as a teacher, you're used to doing that every day and you're good at that. And so when we deal with these kids in school, we're actually dealing with solutions to these issues, and we're going to communicate those solutions effectively to parents. And most teachers I know are a whole lot more creative at coming up with good ways to help children learn than a psychologist is. So the creativity is better within the school, and the communication to the parents is better, and the relationships are such that the parents are more likely to take what you say very seriously. So that's sort of a bit of a balanced view of the positives and negatives of dealing with children in school and outside of school. I really tried hard to think of more benefits of sending children outside the school. I wanted to be a bit more balanced instead of ended up with a whole list of reasons why it's better to have good, competent people within the school dealing with children who are struggling. I guess it's sort of a bit unbalanced there because, in my opinion, it's much better to have good, competent, well-trained people within a school helping kids out.